Ma'am, first class is very expensive. Are you sure you're in the right place? The elderly black woman's hand trembled as she held up her boarding pass. Her husband stood beside her, calm but weary. He'd been here before. What the flight attendant didn't know. She was refusing entry to 2 federal judges. And what happened next would leave the entire plane in stunned silence. The fluorescent lights of Portland International Airport buzzed overhead as Tessa Monroe checked her watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Her jaw was tight. Her shift had been a nightmare, 2 delayed flights, a screaming toddler, and a passenger who'd somehow smuggled a full rotisserie chicken onto Flight 247. She was done. Completely done. That's when she saw them. An elderly black couple approached Gate 12, walking slowly, hand in hand. The man wore a simple navy blazer over a white shirt. The woman had a soft purple scarf wrapped around her shoulders. They moved with the careful steps of people who'd earned every year of their age. Tessa's eyes narrowed. First-class passengers didn't usually look like that. "Excuse me," Tessa called out, stepping directly into their path. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of the gate area. "This is the first-class boarding line." The man, Blake Andrews, stopped. His wife, Naomi, tightened her grip on his arm. Blake's face remained calm, though his eyes showed the weariness of someone who'd been here before. "Yes," Blake said quietly. "We know." Tessa crossed her arms. "First-class tickets are very expensive. Are you sure you're in the right place?" A flush of embarrassment colored Naomi's cheeks. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached into her handbag, pulling out 2 boarding passes. "Here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "These are our tickets." Tessa didn't even look at them properly. She glanced down for half a second, then back up at the couple with an expression that could freeze water. "These must be coach seats. First class is at the front of the plane. You'll need to wait for general boarding." "Miss," Blake said, his voice still steady but firmer now, "if you look at our boarding passes, you'll see." "Sir, I don't have time for this." Tessa's tone had gone from cold to ice. "There are procedures. First-class passengers board first, and I need to see proper documentation." Behind them, other passengers had begun to notice. A businessman in an expensive suit smirked. A young woman with headphones pulled one earbud out, watching. An older white couple whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Naomi's eyes glistened. Not with tears, not yet, but with something deeper. Hurt. Recognition. The kind of pain that comes from being invisible in plain sight. "We have proper documentation," Naomi said, her voice stronger now despite the tremor in her hands. "We purchased first-class tickets 3 months ago for our anniversary trip to—" "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Tessa gestured toward the general boarding area. "You're holding up the line." There was no line. Only the couple stood at the gate. Blake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Perhaps if you look at—" "Sir, I will call security if you don't comply." Tessa's hand moved toward her radio. The gate area had gone silent. 20, maybe 30 people watched now. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked away. A few pulled out their phones. Naomi's hand shook harder. The boarding passes fluttered like wounded birds between her fingers. 53 years of marriage. 40 years of service to their community. And here they stood, being treated like they'd wandered into the wrong neighborhood. "Tessa, what's going on here?" A voice cut through the tension like a knife. Sharp. Authoritative. Female. Tessa spun around. Her supervisor, Sandra Reeves, stood 5 feet away, arms crossed, eyes scanning the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd worked in aviation for 25 years. These passengers seem confused about their seating," Tessa started. "Let me see their boarding passes." Sandra's voice left no room for argument. Naomi handed them over with as much dignity as she could summon. Her chin lifted. Blake placed a gentle hand on the small of her back, a gesture of support that spoke of decades of standing together against moments exactly like this. Sandra studied the passes. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she looked up at the couple, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition? Surprise? Respect? She glanced at the passes again, then at the names printed there in clear black text. Her face went pale. "Oh my God," Sandra whispered, so quietly that only Tessa could hear. "Do you have any idea who these people are?" Tessa's confident expression cracked. "Just a little." "What do you mean?" Sandra turned the boarding passes around so Tessa could see them properly. Really see them. Not just glance. Not just assume. Judge Blake Andrews. Judge Naomi Andrews. The words seemed to pulse on the page. "These are federal judges," Sandra said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Retired federal judges. They're traveling first class to Seattle for their 53rd wedding anniversary." The color drained from Tessa's face like water down a sink. Behind them, passengers had begun recording on their phones. The red lights of cameras blinked like angry eyes. Blake remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Naomi's trembling had stopped. In its place was something else. Something calm and powerful and ancient. The look of a woman who'd spent 40 years on the federal bench, who'd seen humanity at its worst and best, who'd delivered justice with a steady hand and a clear mind. "I see," Naomi said quietly. Those two words carried the weight of continence. Sandra's hand shook as she handed the passes back. "I am so sorry. Please, let me escort you both." "That won't be necessary," Blake said. His voice was gentle but firm. "We can board ourselves." Tessa stood frozen, her face a mask of horror and shame. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No words came. As Blake and Naomi walked past her toward the jetway, Naomi paused. Just for a moment. She turned and looked at Tessa, really looked at her, and in that gaze was something that made everyone watching hold their breath. "We'll talk later, Miss Monroe," Naomi said softly. "You and I." The way she said it wasn't threatening. It was worse than that. It was a promise. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look. Only those who side with unfairness would scroll past this story. 7 hours earlier, the sun had barely kissed the horizon over Portland when Blake Andrews woke to the smell of coffee and the soft hum of his wife moving through their kitchen. He lay still for a moment, listening. After 53 years of marriage, he knew Naomi's rhythms better than his own heartbeat. The gentle clink of ceramic mugs. The whisper of slippers on hardwood floors. The quiet contentment of a woman who'd risen early not from stress, but from joy. Today was special. Blake pushed himself up slowly, his knees protested more these days, and padded toward the kitchen of their modest home in northeast Portland. The house had been theirs for 32 years. Raised their daughter here. Watched grandchildren take their first steps on this very floor. "You're up early," he said, wrapping his arms around Naomi's waist from behind. She leaned back into him, fitting perfectly against his chest like she always had. "Couldn't sleep. Too excited." "It's just Seattle, love." "It's not just Seattle." Naomi turned in his arms, her brown eyes bright despite the early hour. "It's 3 days. Just us. No court documents. No committee meetings. No phone calls about the community center fundraiser." Blake smiled. Even in retirement, they stayed busy. Once a judge, always a judge, people still called, still asked for advice, still needed their wisdom. The work of justice didn't end with a retirement party. "You deserve this," he said softly, kissing her forehead. "We both do." They moved through their morning routine with the ease of decades. Blake made eggs while Naomi toasted bread. They ate at their small kitchen table, the one they'd bought from a yard sale when they were newlyweds and too poor to afford anything better. They'd kept it through everything. Through law school loans. Through judgeship appointments. Through threats and late nights and the weight of making decisions that changed lives. "Remember our first anniversary?" Naomi asked, a smile playing at her lips. "The Chinese restaurant that gave us food poisoning?" Blake laughed. "How could I forget? We spent the entire night taking turns in the bathroom. And you still said it was the best day of your life. Because I spent it with you." He reached across the table and took her hand. That part was true. Their Uber arrived at 8:47 a.m. The driver, a young man with kind eyes and a Bluetooth earpiece, helped load their modest suitcases into the trunk. "Airport?" he asked. "Portland International," Blake confirmed. "We've got time. No rush." The drive took 30 minutes. They watched the city wake up through the windows, joggers on the waterfront, food carts setting up for the day, the Willamette River catching morning light like scattered diamonds. Naomi's phone buzzed. Their daughter, Christina. "Have the best time, you too. You've earned it. Love you. Red heart." Naomi smiled and typed back quickly. Blake watched her, noting the way technology still made her pause sometimes, the way she concentrated on each word. She'd adapted, they both had, but some things still felt foreign. "Christina says the kids want to video chat tonight," Naomi said. "I told her maybe tomorrow. Tonight is just us." "Sounds perfect." At the airport, they moved through security without incident. Blake set his watch in the bin. Naomi removed her jewelry carefully, each piece a story, her mother's ring, the bracelet Blake had given her when she made federal judge, the small gold cross she never traveled without. A TSA agent smiled at them warmly. "Have a great flight, folks." "Thank you," they replied in unison, then laughed at the synchronicity. They found a quiet corner near their gate with 2 hours to spare. Blake had always believed in arriving early, a habit from his years on the bench. Never keep anyone waiting. Never rush justice. Naomi pulled out a book. Blake did a crossword puzzle. Around them, the airport hummed with life. Families traveling. Business people typing furiously on laptops. A young couple arguing quietly about directions. You think about it sometimes? Naomi asked suddenly, not looking up from her book. Think about what? The cases. The ones that still keep you up at night. Blake set down his pencil. He knew exactly what she meant. There were always cases. The ones where you made the right legal decision but wondered about the human cost. The ones where the law was clear but your heart ached anyway. Every day, he admitted. But then I remember, we did our best. We served with integrity. That's all anyone can do. Do you think people remember that? Naomi's voice was soft. When they see us now, do they see judges? Or just old black folks? It was the question that haunted both of them, though they rarely spoke it aloud. Blake reached for her hand. Does it matter? We know who we are. It shouldn't matter, Naomi said. But sometimes. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. At 10:15 a.m., their flight began boarding first class. They gathered their belongings, Naomi's book, Blake's crossword, their carry-on bags. They stood together, smoothing their clothes, checking their boarding passes one more time. Ready? Blake asked. Ready, Naomi smiled. They walked hand in hand toward Gate 12, unaware that in exactly 3 minutes, their peaceful anniversary trip would become something else entirely. Unaware that a young flight attendant named Tessa Monroe was having the worst day of her career, unaware that their dignity was about to be tested in front of dozens of strangers with cameras. As they approached the gate, Naomi squeezed Blake's hand. I love you, she said suddenly, urgently, as if sensing something neither could name. I love you too, Blake replied. Always. They reached the boarding area. The gate agent was busy with paperwork. Other first-class passengers milled about, checking phones, adjusting luggage. And then Tessa Monroe looked up. Her eyes landed on the elderly black couple approaching with their boarding passes ready. Her jaw tightened. Her assumption formed in the space of a heartbeat. I began to unfold like a nightmare neither Blake nor Naomi had expected to face, not here, not now, not after everything they'd given to the cause of justice. Tap like if you believe treating people with kindness costs nothing but means everything. Only the cold-hearted would ignore this couple's dignity. The jetway stretched before Blake and Naomi like a tunnel leading somewhere they'd never wanted to go. Behind them, the gate area buzzed with whispers and the soft clicks of phone cameras capturing everything. Sandra Reeves stood frozen, still holding the boarding passes she'd examined moments before. Her face had gone from pale to red, not from embarrassment, but from barely controlled fury at her employee. Tessa, Sandra said, her voice low and dangerous. My office. The moment we land. But Tessa couldn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, watching the Andrews couple walk away with a grace that made her shame burn hotter. Her mind raced. Federal judges. How had she not known? How had she just assumed? No. She knew how. And that knowledge was a knife twisting in her gut. Let them board, Sandra snapped at the gate agent, who'd been watching the whole scene with wide eyes. And someone tell the captain we have VIP passengers in first class. Judges Blake and Naomi Andrews. The gate agent's fingers flew across her keyboard. Within seconds, a message pinged through the airline system. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Wheeler glanced at his tablet and his eyebrows shot up. Well, he murmured to his co-pilot. We've got federal judges on board. Retired, but still. That's quite an honor. Inside the plane, Blake and Naomi found their seats, 1A and 1B, right at the front of first class. The seats were wide and comfortable, upholstered in soft leather. A small table between them held bottles of water and warm towels. Naomi sank into her seat slowly, her hands still trembling. Not from fear. From the adrenaline that came after confrontation, after having to defend your basic human dignity in front of strangers. Hey, Blake said softly, taking her hand. We're okay. We're here. I know. Naomi's voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. I thought maybe we were past this. That maybe at our age, with everything we've done. I know, love. I know. They sat in silence as other first-class passengers boarded. A businessman in his 50s nodded politely as he passed. A young woman with designer luggage smiled warmly. An elderly white couple, the same ones who'd whispered during the gate incident, avoided eye contact entirely. Then came a voice from behind them. Excuse me? Blake and Naomi turned. A white man in his 40s stood in the aisle, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. His expression was difficult to read, somewhere between apologetic and defensive. I just wanted to say, he continued, that flight attendant was just doing her job. Airlines have rules about checking tickets. She was probably just being thorough. The cabin went silent. Every passenger within earshot stopped what they were doing. Naomi studied the man for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. Sir, when was the last time someone questioned whether you belonged in first class? The man blinked. Well, that's not really the same. Isn't it? Naomi's tone remained gentle, but there was steel underneath. When you walked past that flight attendant, did she stop you? Did she tell you that you must be confused about your seat? No, but did she demand to see your documentation before she'd even looked at your boarding pass? The man's face reddened. Look, I'm just saying she might have made an honest mistake. Mistakes are honest when they happen to everyone equally, Blake interjected, his voice calm but firm. When they happen only to people who look like us, that's not a mistake. That's a pattern. The confrontation had drawn attention. More passengers were listening now, some nodding, others looking uncomfortable. A young black woman in seat 3C had tears in her eyes. An Asian American man was typing furiously on his phone, probably tweeting the whole exchange. The man in khakis opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut him off. Sit down, Richard. His wife, the elderly white woman who'd whispered earlier, was glaring at him from her seat. Just sit down and be quiet. You're making it worse. Richard hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but something in his wife's expression made him retreat to his seat in row 2. The cabin settled into an awkward silence. Flight attendants moved through, checking overhead bins, avoiding eye contact with the Andrews couple. Naomi could see Tessa at the back of first class, her face ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks as another attendant whispered urgently to her. Good, part of Naomi thought. Let her feel it. Let her understand. But another part, the part that had spent 40 years as a judge, that had seen people at their worst and still believed in redemption, felt something else. Not quite pity, but recognition. She'd seen that look before. The look of someone realizing, truly realizing, the harm they'd caused. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Wheeler. We're just about finished with boarding, and we should be pushing back in about 10 minutes. Flight time to Seattle will be approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. As he spoke, Sandra Reeves entered the first-class cabin. She walked directly to Blake and Naomi's row and knelt in the aisle, actually knelt, so she was at eye level with them. Judge Andrews, Mrs. Andrews, she said quietly. I cannot apologize enough for what happened. That was inexcusable. Completely, utterly inexcusable. It's not your apology to make, Naomi said gently. I know. But as her supervisor, as a representative of this airline, I need you to know that behavior does not reflect our values or our training. We will be conducting a full investigation, and there will be consequences. Ms. Reeves, Blake interrupted, his voice kind but firm. Consequences are necessary. But they're not sufficient. Sandra looked confused. I don't understand. Naomi leaned forward slightly. Your employee didn't wake up this morning planning to humiliate us. She made assumptions based on what she saw, two elderly black people who didn't fit her picture of who belongs in first class. The question isn't just what you do to her. It's what you do to address the system that taught her to think that way. Sandra sat back on her heels, struck by the wisdom in Naomi's words. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Training, Blake added. Real training. Not just diversity checkboxes, but actual education about implicit bias, about the assumptions we all carry. We'll do it, Sandra said immediately. I'll make sure of it. She stood, nodded respectfully, and moved toward the back of the cabin where Tessa stood trembling. The plane's engines hummed to life. They began to push back from the gate. Naomi reached for Blake's hand. They sat in silence, processing everything that had happened in the last 30 minutes. Around them, passengers settled in, some still watching them with curiosity or sympathy, others studiously ignoring everything. Then, without warning, the plane shuddered. Not dramatically. Just a small tremor. But it was followed by another. And another. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence while still on the ground. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The shuddering continued. Somewhere in coach, a child started crying. The cabin lights flickered once, twice. And then, 3 rows behind the Andrews couple, an elderly white man clutched his chest and gasped. His wife screamed. Help! Someone help! My husband, he can't breathe. He can't breathe. Chaos erupted. Flight attendants rushed toward the commotion. Passengers stood despite the turbulence, craning to see. The man's wife was sobbing now, holding her husband's hand as his face turned an alarming shade of gray. Is anyone a doctor? A flight attendant shouted. We need a doctor. Silence. No one moved. The man gasped again, his eyes rolling back. And then Naomi Andrews unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. I can help, she said clearly, moving into the aisle. Every eye in first class turned to her. "Ma'am, are you a doctor?" the flight attendant asked desperately. "No," Naomi said, already moving toward the stricken man. "But I was an EMT before I went to law school. 35 years ago, but some things you never forget." She reached the man's seat. Blake was right behind her, already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling 911. We need paramedics at the gate." Naomi placed 2 fingers on the man's neck, checking his pulse. Her face was calm, focused, the same expression she'd worn thousands of times on the bench when lives hung in the balance of her decisions. "Sir," she said firmly. "Sir, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." The man's fingers twitched weakly. Behind Naomi, Tessa Monroe stood frozen, watching the woman she'd humiliated 20 minutes ago now fighting to save a life. And in that moment, the entire plane understood something profound about dignity, about worth, about the content of character versus the color of skin. Comment, respect, if you believe people should be judged by their actions, not their appearance. Only the truly heartless would scroll past this moment. Naomi's hands moved with practiced precision despite decades away from emergency medicine. She loosened the man's collar, checked his airway, monitored his breathing. Each action was deliberate, calm, the muscle memory of someone who'd saved lives long before she'd sat in judgment over them. "His pulse is weak but steady," she said to the flight attendant hovering nearby. "Likely a cardiac episode. We need aspirin if you have it, and I need everyone to step back and give him air." The flight attendant, an older woman named Patricia, nodded quickly. "We have aspirin in the medical kit. I'll get it right now." Blake was on the phone with 911, his voice steady and authoritative. "Yes, we're still at the gate. Gate 12. Elderly male, approximately 70 years old, showing signs of cardiac distress. My wife is administering care now. We need paramedics immediately." The man's wife clutched Naomi's arm, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she whispered. "Please save him. He's all I have." Naomi met her eyes. "What's his name?" "Robert. Robert Callahan." "Robert," Naomi said loudly, clearly. "Robert, stay with me. Help is coming. You're going to be okay, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" Robert's eyes fluttered open slightly. He tried to speak but couldn't form words. "Don't talk," Naomi instructed. "Just breathe. Slow, steady breaths. That's it." Patricia returned with the medical kit. Naomi took the aspirin with steady hands. "Robert, I'm going to put this under your tongue. It's aspirin. It's going to help. Just let it dissolve." She administered the medication with the gentle competence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Around them, the entire first-class cabin watched in silent awe. The turbulence had stopped. The plane sat still at the gate, engines idling. "Paramedics are 2 minutes out," Blake announced, ending his call. Naomi nodded, never taking her eyes off Robert. She held his wrist, monitoring his pulse. "Heart rate is stabilizing. Robert, you're doing great. Just keep breathing for me." Mrs. Callahan sobbed openly now. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." Behind them, Tessa Monroe stood with tears streaming down her face. She watched Naomi, the woman she'd humiliated, the woman she'd assumed didn't belong, now saving a life with grace and expertise. The contrast was devastating. Sandra appeared at Tessa's elbow. "You see now," she whispered. "You see who she is?" Tessa couldn't speak. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. The businessman from earlier, Richard, the one who defended Tessa's actions, stood in the aisle, his face pale. His wife had her hand on his arm, squeezing hard. "That could have been you," she whispered to him. "That could have been you, and she still would have helped. Do you understand now?" Richard's jaw worked silently. Then, very quietly, "Yes." 2 minutes stretched into eternity. Naomi never left Robert's side. She kept talking to him, keeping him conscious, keeping him calm. Blake stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, of partnership, of 53 years of facing the world together. Finally, movement at the cabin door. 4 paramedics rushed in with equipment, their faces professional and focused. "Ma'am, what do we have?" the lead paramedic asked Naomi. She stood smoothly, making room but staying close. "Elderly male, cardiac event. Pulse was weak and thready when I first checked him approximately 4 minutes ago. I administered aspirin sublingually. Pulse has stabilized somewhat, but he needs immediate transport." The paramedic glanced at her with surprise and respect. "You have medical training?" "Former EMT. Long time ago." "Well, you probably saved his life." He turned to his team. "Let's get him on the gurney. Carefully now." They worked quickly, efficiently. Robert was lifted onto the stretcher, oxygen mask in place, for being started. Mrs. Callahan gathered their belongings with shaking hands. As they wheeled Robert past Naomi, he reached out weakly and caught her hand. His eyes met hers, clear now, aware. "Thank you," he whispered through the oxygen mask. Naomi squeezed his hand gently. "You're welcome, Robert. Be well." Mrs. Callahan paused as she followed her husband. She looked at Naomi, then at Blake, then back at Naomi. Her face crumpled with emotion. "I'm so ashamed," she said quietly. "At the gate? I saw what happened. I saw how that woman treated you, and I didn't say anything. I just whispered to my husband like a coward. And now you saved his life." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Naomi stepped forward and gently touched the woman's shoulder. "Go with your husband. He needs you now. That's what matters." "But Grace," Naomi said firmly. "We all need grace. Including me. Including you. Now go." Mrs. Callahan nodded, wiped her eyes, and hurried after the paramedics. The cabin door closed. The plane fell silent. Captain Wheeler's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Due to the medical emergency, we're going to have a slight delay while we complete some paperwork and prepare for departure. We appreciate your patience, and I want to personally thank the passenger who provided medical assistance. Your quick thinking likely saved a life today." Spontaneous applause broke out in first class. It started with the young black woman in 3C, then spread, passengers clapping, some standing, all of them looking at Naomi with respect and admiration. Naomi stood in the aisle, suddenly exhausted. Blake was there immediately, guiding her back to their seats. She sank down heavily, and for the first time since the morning began, she allowed herself to feel everything: the humiliation at the gate, the adrenaline of the medical emergency, the weight of Mrs. Callahan's shame. "You were amazing," Blake murmured, kissing her temple. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what you've always done." A shadow fell across them. They looked up. Tessa Monroe stood in the aisle, her face blotchy from crying, her hands twisted together. She looked young suddenly, not the dismissive flight attendant from the gate, but a scared girl who'd made a terrible mistake and was finally understanding its weight. "Judge Andrews," she began, her voice breaking. "Mrs. Andrews. I don't know how to." She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "There's no excuse for what I did. None. I made assumptions based on how you looked, and that's inexcusable. I was wrong. I was so, completely, horribly wrong." Naomi regarded her steadily. "Sit down, Miss Monroe." Tessa blinked. "What? Sit down." Naomi gestured to the empty seat across the aisle, Richard's seat, as he'd moved to the back to give them space. Tessa glanced at Sandra, who nodded. Slowly, Tessa sat. Naomi turned in her seat to face the young woman fully. When she spoke, her voice was neither harsh nor gentle, it was the voice of a judge, clear and measured and true. "Miss Monroe, how old are you?" 26. "And how long have you worked for this airline?" 2 years. "Do you consider yourself a racist?" Tessa's face crumpled. "No. God, no. I never. I don't hate anyone because of their race. I swear I don't. But you made assumptions today. About us. Based solely on the color of our skin." "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "Do you know what implicit bias is, Miss Monroe?" Tessa nodded miserably. "We had training. But I didn't think it applied to me. I thought because I don't hate anyone, because I have black friends, because I voted for. I thought I was exempt." "No one is exempt," Naomi said quietly. "Not you. Not me. Not anyone. We all carry biases, learn from our culture, from our experiences, from the world around us. The question isn't whether we have them. It's whether we're willing to recognize them and do the hard work of changing." Tessa wiped her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough, but I am. I'm so sorry." Blake leaned forward. "Miss Monroe, let me tell you something about my wife and me. We've spent our entire adult lives fighting for justice, in courtrooms, in communities, in every space we've occupied. We've faced what you did to us today more times than you can imagine." He paused, his voice heavy with history. "When I was a young lawyer, I showed up to court and the bailiff asked me to go wait in the public gallery because he assumed I was a defendant, not an attorney. When Naomi got her first judgeship, people called the courthouse claiming she must have been a diversity hire, that she couldn't possibly be qualified. We've been followed in stores, stopped by police, questioned about whether we really live in our own neighborhood." Tessa's face had gone white. "But here's what we learned," Naomi continued. "Anger is easy. Bitterness is easy. What's hard, what takes real courage, is believing that people can change. That moments like this can be teaching moments, not just punishment moments." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Tessa whispered. "That's not for you to decide," Naomi said firmly. "But I'll tell you what you do deserve, a chance to learn. To grow. To be better tomorrow than you were today." She leaned closer, her eyes intense. Miss Monroe, what happened today will haunt you. It should. But don't let it destroy you. Let it transform you. Let it make you the kind of person who sees everyone, with dignity and respect. Let it make you someone who speaks up when you see injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Tessa nodded, tears flowing freely now. I will. I promise I will. Good. Naomi sat back. Now go to your job. And do it well. Tessa stood on shaking legs. She started to walk away, then turned back. Judge Andrews? When that man had his heart attack, you didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Even after what I did to you, you helped. Why? Naomi smiled, small, sad, wise. Because that's what we do, Miss Monroe. That's what we've always done. We help. Even when it costs us. Even when people don't think we belong. We help anyway. That's beautiful. No, Naomi corrected gently. It's necessary. There's a difference. Tessa nodded one final time and walked away, her shoulders straighter despite her tears. The plane's engines powered up. The captain announced they'd been cleared for takeoff. Blake took Naomi's hand. You okay? I will be, she said. Eventually. That was good, what you did. With her. Was it? Naomi looked uncertain for the first time. Sometimes I wonder if we're too forgiving. If we let people off too easy. You didn't let her off easy. You gave her truth. There's nothing easy about facing the truth. Outside the window, Portland began to slide away as the plane taxied toward the runway. Inside seat 1A, Naomi Andrews closed her eyes and let herself feel the weight of the day. The humiliation. The grace. The teaching. The hope. The never-ending work of justice. Hit like if you believe in second chances but also accountability. Only those who fear growth would ignore this lesson. The plane climbed into the morning sky, leaving Portland behind in a patchwork of green and gray. Sunlight streamed through the windows of first class, painting everything in shades of gold. Naomi sat with her eyes closed, Blake's hand warm in hers. The hum of the engines was soothing after the chaos of the past hour. Around them, the cabin had settled into a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after a storm, when everyone is too exhausted or too thoughtful for small talk. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wheeler again. We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. You're free to move about the cabin, and our flight attendants will be coming through shortly with beverages and snacks. He paused, then added something unusual. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Judges Blake and Naomi Andrews, who are traveling with us today in first class. For those who don't know, the Andrews served for decades as federal judges in Oregon, and they dedicated their lives to justice and equality in our community. Mrs. Andrews also provided emergency medical care to a passenger today, likely saving his life. On behalf of everyone at the airline, thank you both for your service and your grace. More applause rippled through the cabin. Naomi opened her eyes, surprised. Blake squeezed her hand and smiled. You can't hide anymore, love. You're famous now. I never wanted to be famous, Naomi murmured. I just wanted to do good work. You did. You do. Always. Patricia, the senior flight attendant, appeared with a cart. Her eyes were kind, her smile genuine. Judge Andrews, Mrs. Andrews, can I get you anything? Coffee? Juice? We also have champagne if you'd like to celebrate your anniversary properly. Naomi looked at Blake. Champagne sounds lovely. 2 glasses, please, Blake said. As Patricia poured, she leaned in slightly. I've worked for this airline for 18 years. What happened at the gate? I'm ashamed. I trained Tessa myself, and clearly I failed her. Failed you. You didn't fail anyone, Naomi said gently. This isn't about one person or one training session. It's about the water we all swim in, the assumptions, the stereotypes, the invisible biases that shape how we see each other. Patricia nodded slowly. After we land, I'm going to talk to our training department. Really talk to them. We need to do better. That's all we can ask, Blake said. That, and the willingness to keep trying. Patricia handed them their champagne glasses and moved on, and Blake raised his glass. To 53 years. To 53 years, Naomi echoed. And to still believing the world can be better. They clinked glasses and drank. The champagne was crisp and cold, bubbles dancing on Naomi's tongue. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself feel nothing but joy. Just a woman on a plane with her husband, celebrating love that had outlasted everything the world had thrown at them. Movement in the aisle caught her attention. The young black woman from seat 3C was approaching, her expression nervous but determined. She was maybe 30, dressed in business casual, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Excuse me, she said quietly. Judge Andrews? I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just needed to say thank you. Naomi smiled warmly. You're not bothering us. What's your name? Jasmine. Jasmine Porter. She twisted her hands together. I'm a first-year associate at a law firm in Seattle. Seeing what you went through today, and how you handled it. I needed you to know what it meant to me. Sit down, Jasmine, Naomi said, gesturing to the empty seat across the aisle. Tell me. Jasmine sat carefully, as if afraid she might break something. I'm the only black associate at my firm. Only the second they've ever hired. And sometimes I feel like I don't belong. Like people are always questioning whether I'm really qualified, whether I really deserve to be there. Her voice cracked slightly. I've been thinking about quitting. Going somewhere else, somewhere more diverse. But watching you today, the way you held your head up, the way you taught that flight attendant with such grace, I realized something. What's that? Blake asked gently. That I'm not just there for me. I'm there for every black girl who comes after me. Everyone who needs to see that we belong in those spaces. That we've always belonged. Tears streamed down Jasmine's face, but she was smiling. You didn't let that woman's ignorance define you. You defined yourself. And then you saved a man's life. And then you taught her, really taught her, instead of just being angry. That's who I want to be. Naomi felt her own eyes sting. She reached across and took Jasmine's hand. Listen to me carefully, she said. You do belong. Not because of what you prove to anyone else, but because you are qualified, you are talented, and you are worthy. Your presence in that firm isn't a favor they're doing for you. It's a gift you're giving them, the gift of your brilliance, your perspective, your humanity. But it's so hard, Jasmine whispered. Aren't you tired? After everything you've been through, aren't you just tired? Naomi and Blake exchanged a long look. In it was a lifetime of exhaustion, of proving themselves again and again, of facing discrimination with dignity, of carrying the weight of representation everywhere they went. Yes, Naomi said finally. We're tired. We've been tired for 50 years. But you know what? We're also hopeful. Because we see young people like you, brilliant and determined, taking up the work. We see the world changing, slowly, too slowly, but changing. And that gives us strength. Blake nodded. The work of justice is never finished, Jasmine. It's passed from generation to generation like a relay race. We ran our leg as hard and as far as we could. Now it's your turn. And someday, you'll pass it to someone else. Jasmine wiped her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to stay. At the firm. And I'm going to be excellent. Not just for me, but for all of us. That's my girl, Naomi said warmly. Now go back to your seat and drink some water. You've had an emotional morning. Jasmine laughed through her tears, stood, and impulsively hugged Naomi before returning to her seat. The plane flew on through clear skies. Below, the landscape shifted, forests giving way to mountains, mountains to valleys, the world spreading out in endless variation and beauty. Blake leaned his head back against the seat. You know what I was thinking about? What's that? Our first big case. Remember? The school desegregation case in 1987. Naomi smiled at the memory. How could I forget? You were so nervous. Kept dropping your papers. I was terrified. A 35-year-old black lawyer arguing in front of a federal judge, a white judge who'd been on the bench since before I was born. I was sure he'd rule against us. But he didn't. No. He ruled in our favor. And you know what he said to me afterward? Naomi shook her head. He said, Mr. Andrews, your arguments were so compelling that I had no choice but to see the truth. You changed my mind today. Thank you for that. Blake's voice grew thick with emotion. A white judge in his 70s, thanking a young black lawyer for teaching him something. That's when I realized, people can change. Systems can change. It's slow, it's hard, but it's possible. Is that why you went easy on Tessa? Naomi asked. Because you remembered that judge? Partly. And partly because I remembered myself, all the times I made assumptions, all the times I fell short of my own ideals. We're all works in progress, love. All of us. 30 minutes before landing, Sandra Reeves approached their seats one final time. With her was Tessa Monroe, who looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Judge Andrews, Mrs. Andrews, Sandra began. Tessa has something she'd like to say, if you're willing to listen. Naomi nodded. Go ahead, Miss Monroe. Tessa took a deep breath. Her voice was steadier now, though her eyes were still red. I've been thinking about what you said. About transformation versus destruction. And I realized something, I can't just say I'm sorry and move on. I need to do something. I need to change something real. She pulled out her phone and showed them the screen. It was an email draft. I'm writing to our corporate training department. I'm proposing a mandatory bias training program, not the basic kind we have now, but something deeper. Something that uses real stories, real consequences, real growth. And I'm volunteering to share my story. What I did today. What I learned. So other people don't make the same mistakes. Blake raised his eyebrows, impressed. That takes courage. It takes less courage than you've shown your entire lives, Tessa said quietly. You face this kind of thing all the time, and you keep showing up with grace. The least I can do is own my mistakes and try to prevent others from repeating them. She paused, then added, I also want you to know, I called Robert Callahan's wife. The hospital says he's stable. He's going to be okay. Thanks to Mrs. Andrews. Naomi felt warmth bloom in her chest. I'm so glad. His wife told me what she said to you. About being ashamed that she didn't speak up at the gate. She wanted me to tell you that she's donating to the Equal Justice Initiative in your names. And that she's going to start speaking up every time she sees injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. That's wonderful, Blake said. Really wonderful. Tessa looked at them both, her expression earnest. I know I can't undo what I did. But I promise you, I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure I see people. Really see them. Not their appearance, not my assumptions. Just them. Naomi stood and, to everyone's surprise, embraced Tessa. The young woman stiffened, then melted into the hug, fresh tears flowing. You're going to be okay, Miss Monroe, Naomi whispered. This doesn't have to define you. Let it refine you instead. When they separated, Tessa nodded, unable to speak. Sandra squeezed her shoulder, and they returned to their stations. The captain announced their descent into Seattle. Blake and Naomi gathered their belongings in comfortable silence. Out the window, Puget Sound sparkled in the midday sun. The city rose up in gleaming towers, surrounded by water and mountains, beautiful, complex, full of promise. You know what I want to do when we land? Naomi asked. What's that? I want to walk. Just walk along the waterfront, hold your hand, eat overpriced seafood, and pretend we're just two people in love. Not judges. Not symbols. Not teachers. Just us. Blake kissed her hand. That sounds perfect. The plane touched down smoothly. As they taxied to the gate, Captain Wheeler's voice came over the intercom one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle. Local time is 12:47 p.m. Before you deplane, I want to thank you for your patience during our unusual morning. Special thanks again to Judges Andrews, you reminded us all what grace under pressure looks like. The cabin erupted in applause one more time. Passengers stood, gathering their things, but many paused to shake Blake and Naomi's hands as they filed past. Jasmine stopped and whispered, thank you again. For everything. Richard, the businessman who defended Tessa, stopped too. Judge Andrews, I was wrong. About everything. I'm sorry. Apology accepted, Blake said simply. Now go forward and do better. I will. I promise. Finally, the cabin was empty except for Blake, Naomi, Patricia, Tessa, and Sandra. Patricia approached with a small envelope. This is from the airline. A full refund of your tickets, upgrades on all future flights, and a personal apology from our CEO. It's not enough, but it's a start. Thank you, Naomi said, accepting the envelope. And thank you for your kindness today. Tessa stepped forward one last time. I know you probably never want to see me again, but would it be okay if I wrote to you sometime? About the training program? I'd like your input, if you're willing to give it. Naomi smiled. Miss Monroe, I think that would be just fine. We're retired, but we're never too busy for the work of justice. She pulled out a business card, yes, even in retirement, she kept them, and handed it to Tessa. Email me. We'll talk. Tessa clutched the card like it was made of gold. Thank you. Thank you so much. Blake and Naomi walked off the plane into the terminal, hand in hand, their carry-ons rolling behind them. The Seattle airport was bustling, people rushing to catch connections, families reuniting, the beautiful chaos of humanity in motion. Well, Blake said. That was quite a morning. It was, Naomi agreed. But we're here. Together. Still standing. Still standing, Blake echoed. After 53 years, still standing. They found a quiet bench near a window overlooking the tarmac. Naomi leaned against Blake's shoulder, suddenly exhausted but also strangely energized. Do you think she'll really change? Naomi asked. Tessa? I think she has a chance. That's all any of us get, a chance. What we do with it is up to us. And the others? The passengers who watched, who recorded everything, who'll share it on social media and forget about it by tomorrow. Blake was quiet for a moment. Some will forget. Some will remember. Some will change. We plant seeds, love. We don't always get to see them grow. Naomi nodded. It was the truth they'd lived by for decades. Do the work. Plant the seeds. Trust the harvest, even when you can't see it. You know what, she said suddenly. I'm glad it happened. Blake looked at her in surprise. Really? Really? Not the humiliation part, that I could have done without. But the rest. The teaching. The transformation. Meeting Jasmine. Seeing Tessa truly understand. Saving Robert's life. All of it. It reminded me why we did this work in the first place. She sat up and looked at her husband, her partner, her best friend. We don't get to be just two people in love. Not completely. Not in this world, not with our history. We carry our community with us everywhere we go. And that's not a burden, Blake. It's a privilege. It's an honor. Blake's eyes shone with unshed tears. 53 years, and you still surprise me. You still inspire me. Good, Naomi said, standing and pulling him up with her. Now let's go find that overpriced seafood and walk along the water. We've earned it. They walked toward the exit, toward Seattle, toward 3 days of peace and celebration. Behind them, the plane they just left would take off again in an hour, carrying a crew that had been forever changed. Tessa would go home that night and begin writing her proposal. Sandra would call the training department first thing Monday morning. Patricia would tell her husband the whole story over dinner, and it would change how he saw the world. And somewhere in the Seattle airport, Jasmine Porter would board her connection home, pull out her laptop, and write an email to her firm's managing partner. The subject line would read, Diversity Initiative Proposal. She would attach a detailed plan for recruiting, retaining, and promoting lawyers of color. It would take 3 months, but the firm would implement every suggestion. Seeds. Planted everywhere Blake and Naomi Andrews went. Some would take root immediately. Others would lie dormant for years before sprouting. But all of them, every single one, mattered. That evening, Blake and Naomi sat at a waterfront restaurant, sharing salmon and wine, watching the sun set over Puget Sound in streaks of orange and gold. Happy anniversary, my love, Blake said, raising his glass. Happy anniversary, Naomi replied. To 53 years of fighting the good fight together. And to 53 more? They laughed, both knowing that wasn't realistic but loving the sentiment anyway. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Naomi thought about the day, all of it, the good and the bad. She thought about Tessa's tears and Jasmine's hope and Robert's grateful eyes and Mrs. Callahan's shame transformed into action. She thought about the long, winding road they'd walked together, through segregation and civil rights, through law school and judgeship, through threats and triumphs, through moments of despair and moments of transcendent joy. And she thought about the future, not theirs necessarily, but the one they were helping to build. A future where young black lawyers like Jasmine didn't have to question whether they belonged. Where flight attendants like Tessa recognized their biases and chose to grow. Where people like Robert and his wife saw their privilege and used it for good. It wasn't the future yet. But it was coming. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, it was coming. What are you thinking about? Blake asked, noticing her distant expression. Naomi smiled and squeezed his hand. I'm thinking about seeds. And gardens. And the harvest we'll never fully see but always believed in. That's very poetic. I'm feeling poetic. It's our anniversary. I'm allowed. They laughed together as the night settled around them, two people in love, two warriors for justice, two seeds planters who never stopped believing in the garden. And somewhere above them, a plane flew through the darkening sky, carrying passengers who would never forget the day they learned about dignity, grace, and the quiet power of people who refuse to be diminished by ignorance. The work of justice continues. Always. Share this story if you believe in the power of grace, the possibility of change, and the dignity every human being deserves. Those who stand for justice will pass this forward. Those who fear truth will scroll away. Comment what this story taught you about judging others, about second chances, about the quiet courage it takes to face discrimination with dignity. Your words might be the seed that changes someone's mind today. Because that's what we do. We plant seeds. Even when we're tired. Even when it's hard. We plant seeds anyway.